you and I and Paul collectively have something in common. We care. We care a great deal about our local communities, and we care passionately about our country, Canada. We love our Canada, the best country on the planet. However, having said that we're the best country doesn't mean that we're perfect. It doesn't mean that there are things that we could do much better. And it certainly doesn't mean that we don't have social injustice in our country. How is it that in a country as wealthy as ours, every morning in communities here in Etobicoke and across Toronto, we don't have hundreds, but in fact we have thousands of children going to school undernourished? How is it that in a first world country such as ours, we have First Nations, indigenous peoples, living in third world squalor? How is it that in a country as blessed as ours is, with natural beauty and natural resources, that we have extractive industries going about doing their business in ways that destroys that natural beauty and local environment and diminishes the future quality of life of our children and grandchildren? Friends, it didn't have to be that way, and it wasn't always so. I'm going to take you back to the 1990s, when Paul Martin became finance minister. We inherited a fiscal mess from the previous Conservative government. And as finance minister, Paul Martin began the very difficult job of getting our fiscal house in order. And once he put our fiscal house in order, he began dreaming a greater dream for Canada in the 21st century. He began thinking of ways that we would address our social and structural challenges as a country. Then as Prime Minister, Paul Martin provided visionary leadership. Unfortunately, the election of 2006 happened. And instead, we've had a Harper decade. A decade during which we've seen growing social divisions. We've seen a growing democratic deficit. We've seen growing international jingoism. We've seen growing environmental destruction. Well, it seems the only thing that's not growing is the Canadian economy. It was under the visionary leadership of Paul Martin that we signed an historic agreement, the Kelowna Accord, with every single First Nation in Canada. An accord that would have started to address those squalid third world conditions we find on our reserves. And what did Mr. Harper do? Worse, he tore it up.
Shame. Shame on him.
And what did he give us instead? Senator Patrick Brazeau. under the visionary leadership of Paul Martin, we signed an agreement with every province across the country, a new deal for cities and communities. I remember being part of the GTA caucus, our working group, where we excitedly discussed how, with that historic funding for public transit and infrastructure, we would begin building an Eglinton line, extend the Bloor Dundas line, projects that may well have, by today, been nearing completion. And what did Mr. Harper do? He tore it up. And what do we have instead? Well, we just have to take a look south of the plaza here, the Eglinton corridor, perpetual gridlock. And it's not just along the Eglinton corridor, it's every major artery in Toronto and through urban centres across this country.
It's his action plan.
And then, under Paul Martin's visionary leadership, we signed another agreement with all of the provinces, an early learning and childcare agreement that would have guaranteed that the most vulnerable amongst our children, the smallest, most vulnerable, every day would be properly nourished, and notwithstanding circumstances born into, every Canadian child would have a start of equal opportunity. And what did Mr. Harper do? He tore that one up too. He tore up the Kelowna Accord. He tore up the New Deal for cities and communities. He tore up the Early Learning Childhood Agreement. And what has Mr. Harper's greatest expenditure been, or what has he decided on his greatest legacy expenditure? $44 billion untendered contract for stealth attack planes, the F-35s. So my question to Mr. Harper is, when there are hundreds of First Nations living in third world conditions, when there are thousands of children in Canada in school every morning undernourished, when there are millions of Canadians gridlocked, frustrated every day, who are you planning to stealthily attack? Friends, let me tell you who's been stealthily under attack for the past decade. You and I and every single one of us, every Canadian. Paul, it's because of you that I first ran for public office. It was because of that visionary leadership. Not that long ago, friends, we had a grand dream. We had a big dream for our country, as big as the geography that we have. It was a time when internationally, when people talked about Canada, they said, what the world needs more of is Canada. Friends, today we saw a forum poll. I'm sure many of you read about it in the Toronto Star. Here in Etobicoke Centre, we're in the tightest, closest race in the GTA and perhaps in the country. In the next 3.5 weeks, Etobicoke Centre is ground zero. And that's why it's such an honor for every one of us, and for myself in particular, to have the Right Honourable Paul Martin standing with us during this epic battle in Etobicoke Centre, shoulder to shoulder. Thank you, Paul, for everything you've done for our country, and thank you for being here with us today.